Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. We have a number of people still dialing in, and we will get started in just a moment or two. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Choosing Your Channel, Understanding the Unique Characteristics of Social Media Platforms. A big question here in the space of government social media: which platforms and when, and how to keep a message across those platforms out to your audience in a consistent fashion. Big topic for us, and we're excited to have Katie Nelson, Social Media and Public Relations Coordinator from Mountain View Police Department in California, join us today to share her perspective on this important topic. Now, today's presentation is a part of our ongoing series here at Archive Social called the Agency to Agency Webinar Series. We at Archive Social are in an incredibly fortunate position to work with more than 2,000 public sector agencies on their use of social media. We're more on the legal side of things, but we're there to really emphasize and empower the benefits of social media and open communication in government. And along this journey, we've had this wonderful opportunity to showcase people like Katie month after month in terms of the lessons learned, the strategies, the tips and tricks on how to make social media work for your public sector agency. So again, very, very excited to have Katie join us today for today's topic. If you're looking at the screen and you see these topics from the past, we do have a library of these presentations, so please reach out to us if you're interested in a recording or a copy of the slide deck. We've had a lot of great content from a lot of great people in this series, and we'll keep it going. And momentarily, I want to make sure that you're actually seeing my screen so that you can make an assessment on the presentations that we've had. So I'll leave that up here for just a moment. And I'm going to move on to talk about today's agenda. Again, the topic is choosing your channel, understanding the unique characteristics of social media platforms. And again, we have Katie Nelson joining us. Now, before we get into it, a few housekeeping notes. All attendees are on mute. We've got quite an audience online with us today. We do want this to be interactive, so while you're on mute, you can use the GoToWebinar console to share your questions. Katie will be here at the end to answer your questions. Go ahead and get them in there throughout the presentation. We'll take time at the end to cover as many questions as possible. And in terms of the topic, again, Katie Nelson with the Mountain View PD, a longtime friend of ours here at Archive Social. And if you've at all been involved in the government social media space, certainly in the law enforcement side, public safety side of things, you've probably heard of or seen Katie speak before. So again, very, very excited to have her come and join and share her perspective on the different social media platforms and how to leverage them and communicate across those platforms. That is the heart of our conversation here today with the agency to agency presentation. Now, towards the end, I will take some time. I am your host, Anil Chawla, founder and CEO here at Archive Social. This is one of my favorite things to do, to join in on these conversations. I'll take some time to give Katie a breath and also give you an update on what we're seeing in the industry from a legal policy side of things. As again, that's where we like to add value to the industry here at Archive Social in our social media CYA segment. That'll be just a few minutes while Katie catches up and the questions come in, and then we'll use the rest of the time to cover as many questions as possible. So with that, quick introduction here on Katie Nelson. She, again, is the Social Media and Public Relations Coordinator for the Mountain View Police Department, a department that has been at the forefront of social media for many, many years, has taken a very authentic, hands-on approach with communicating on various social media platforms, being incredibly responsive in tough times and in day-to-day activities, and has had a lot of lessons learned and a lot of knowledge to share out to the industry at large. So again, very thankful to have Katie join us today. She's also recently appointed as a PIO Section Secretary for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP. So congrats on that, Katie. And as you see her doing today, she speaks across the country on social media best practices, crisis communications, and perhaps most importantly, forming positive relationships between law enforcement, the media, and of course, the citizens at large. So these are the kinds of topics that Katie can lend a lot of perspective on, even if they're not in her slide deck today. So please get those questions going. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to let Anil come over and give me access to my screen. And I just wanted to say thank you again so much for having me today. My goal is to be able to have you guys take something away from this presentation that you can implement immediately, and something that you'll be able to take back to your agency and really think about how you can incorporate different social media channels to discuss and have conversations and engage with different aspects of your communities. So different demographics, different populations, things like that. So let's start with, there we go. Why social media strategy matters. So in all of this, your job is to ensure that whatever you're doing on whatever channel, there's a strategy there. There's the ability to connect and communicate with the people that you're trying to target. That includes dealing with rumor mills and also ensuring that you are feeding the beast. We live in an instant gratification culture, so people essentially are looking for the right here, right now. How can you use social media to keep your communities informed, and more importantly, how can you keep them with you in your story in good times and in bad? So where your community needs you is where you need to be. So essentially, you need to find out from your communities and from your demographics within your communities where they're preferring to communicate. Where do they talk every day? And are you using these platforms to share information, or more importantly, are you using them to engage? And that really depends on the platform that you're using. How are you engaging with them in the most effective way possible? Let's start with Twitter. Twitter really is quick hit information. This is not a long form storytelling platform. So people you are engaging with on this platform are looking for news and information quickly. What does that sound like? That sounds like a journalist, right? In fact, 4 out of 5 journalists who use this platform are gathering news. They're getting information. So use them as your digital bullhorn. So use Twitter in critical incidents when you are trying to get information out to as many people in your community as possible and quickly. Make them help you share your message. And make sure that you're using Twitter in an effective way in that you aren't just sending one tweet out every day. Over 6,000 tweets are sent every second. How are you keeping up with that pace? You're not going to get follower fatigue by sending out 2 tweets a day or 3 tweets a day or responding and engaging on that platform. Having a dialogue and creating a space where people feel that they can interact with you on a platform that's as fast as Twitter is very important. A lot of times you're also going to see the ability to establish your story early. So you want to be in the driver's seat of information here. You want to be staying on top of questions, comments, and anything that you're seeing coming to your agency on Twitter. Again, this is going to be the fastest platform that you deal with. We call it having fleet fingers. You have to be available and you have to be willing to follow up, because so quickly your message can get lost. And what's really going to happen here is if you are not on top of information on Twitter and you're not on top of telling your story, somebody else is going to do it for you. So what we like to say is, if you're not first, you're last. And that's from a movie that I hold near and dear to my heart, which is Talladega Nights. So bear that in mind when you're using Twitter to tell your story and how you're connecting with people who also operate in a very fast-paced environment, such as journalists. Tips for how to ensure that you're using Twitter correctly to tell your story and to connect with the right demographics here. Make sure that you're tweeting regularly in a crisis, every 10 to 15 minutes. Don't let the rumor mill churn. Don't let the silence speak for itself. If you are not responding to comments or questions, That's essentially an answer in and of itself. It's you telling your followers and the journalists who are asking questions on Twitter that you don't have time for them. Make sure you're tagging all affiliates possible when you are out of a crisis or in a crisis, so that you're reaching audiences who may not be following you, but are following other agencies. So for example, it's back to school week here in California. Are we tagging people in our community who have relevant connections to the police department, but maybe their parents or students or even representatives of their agencies aren't necessarily following us? Absolutely. So anytime we have photos or videos of schools, we're ensuring that we're tagging or using their handles in our messages to ensure that their audiences are seeing what we have in the event that they're not seeing it initially because they don't follow us, but that they may be able to follow it subsequently. And understand that information is fluid on here. Things will change. It's okay to maybe have a tweet error that has a misspelling or something like that. It's okay to be human. On all of these platforms, you need to ensure that you're relatable. You have to tell your story in a way that humanizes your agency when people can't see that they're talking to you face to face. Some things to avoid. Don't let the rumor mill churn. Again, silence speaks for itself. And then don't let rumors go unanswered. Stay on top of things. And this isn't just for rumors. This is for questions. This is for journalists reaching out for asking for additional information. This is for your community advocates who are using it to spread messages to their advocates as well. The more that you can use Twitter to be quick, the more you will see an ability to tell your story evenly across all platforms. Because again, this platform moves so fast, all the other platforms are going to feel relatively slow. What's a good example of how people use Twitter effectively? Let me give you the New Zealand Police Department. They did an excellent job when the Christchurch attack happened. And this is, again, a critical incident, so it's not necessarily a run-of-the-mill, average day story where you're trying to pull the curtain back on your agency. But what's important here is that they understand how this platform works. They understand that Twitter is primarily an information sharing platform, not a storytelling platform per se, but an information sharing platform. So they're condensing as much information as possible to ensure that they are reaching as many people as possible and in a quick hit way. Another example is the Jacksonville County Sheriff's Office in Florida when they had the Jacksonville Landing mass shooting. I can't stress enough how important it is to ensure that you are creating ways for people to come to find you when you may have an experience or an incident where you need people to get as much information from you as possible. So that includes things like creating trending hashtags and ensuring that the way that you use Twitter is the same when you are having information that's happening quickly and that you are maximizing your voice on the platform, and that includes maximizing your content. So sharing videos, sharing photos, sharing graphics or other data that people need to collect quickly so that they have as much information at their fingertips as possible. And then make sure that when you are telling your story on this platform, again, people are looking for quick hit information quickly. So have content lined up. People are dramatic and lazy. They're not going to go back and look for it. If you say, well, we shared that last week and people have to scroll through your feed, it's not going to work, guys. You have to ensure that you have the information ready to share repeatedly over and over. And here's something that we've learned a lot, that unfortunately it's becoming more and more of a trend for government agencies. We can talk and wax poetic about what we do, how we impact our communities in a positive way, but people, if they can't see it, they're not going to believe it. So essentially treat social media like Santa Claus. You are providing those gifts to them over and over so that they continue to believe in the mission of what you're doing. And also make sure that you're sharing your agency's efforts by alleviating people's concerns with things like building up response efforts. I cannot stress that enough. Two-way engagement is the primary way that your agency will ensure that no comments are left behind. There's no wait till later here, guys. Again, I think the best way to describe it would be with Jeff Bezos' comment here. If you make customers unhappy in the physical world, they might each tell 6 friends. But if you make customers unhappy on the internet, they can tell 6,000 people. So again, that's very much relevant to how government agencies are either being responsive on social media, telling their story effectively on social media, and how people feel with that experience, that customer service experience online. What about Facebook? Facebook is your long-form storytelling. It's, think of it as sitting down with a nice book. But how many of us have time to do that anymore? Really, Facebook is for the older generation, the folks who have the time to sit back and read and look at really what you're sharing. So while Facebook may be the largest platform in the world that has 2 billion active daily users, it's increasingly difficult to reach your audiences on Facebook because of several things. Kids are moving away from the platform. In fact, I don't think any Gen Zers have Facebook anymore. In fact, many millennials have moved away from it. Algorithmic changes. We've seen that with the 2016 election and privacy concerns and Cambridge Analytica. How do you rise above the noise? How do you rise above the fear and the privacy issues that that platform has to ensure that your information is still being seen and shared? Make sure that you are encouraging people to see your stuff. Show them this graphic here. If you want to continue to see our platform and you want to continue to ensure that you're getting information from us here and this is a primary platform for your community, make sure they know how to see your stuff. Give them the directions to do so. You have to remember that on all platforms, but specifically Facebook, it's essentially both sides of the coin. You have a crisis scenario and you're sharing information, that's one thing. But what really hits home for Facebook and really bumps up the ability for people to see your stuff is engagement. So social media has leveled the playing field, Facebook especially, with being able to engage with our communities. And the way that you beat the system is having interactions with commenters on your posts. Or you use things that the platform is encouraging people to use effectively and to your benefit. So for example, Facebook Live. Did you know that Facebook Live videos are watched 3 times more than a produced video? I didn't know that until recently. So guess what? We're trying it out tonight. We're doing a drone presentation, and rather than producing a video and sharing it later with our community, we're going live so that people can chime in real time and that we can respond in real time to people's questions. And we're more than likely going to see a tripling of viewership because guess what? This is what Facebook is promoting. Also, for government agencies and for especially first responders and emergency managers, get to know about local alerts and what they can do for you. Facebook has greatly enhanced the way that this is used in the last year. They've even delineated the ability for how you designate local alerts. So now it could be for weather, it could be for traffic alerts, it could be for missing people or criminal incidents. Those also boost the way that you can connect with your community and that people see your content and they know your story. They know that you're present on the platform. So make sure that you're following up and that you're reading up on all of the things that this platform, albeit it's difficult to reach your audience, but what this platform can do for you, especially if this is the primary platform in your community. Also understand that, again, with it being the largest platform, it probably has a high reciprocity rate for other platforms. So, for example, let's say you are a Facebook user. If you look on this graphic here, you'll see that probably about 32% also use Twitter, 47% use Instagram, but guess what? A huge number of people are also using YouTube, for example. Do you have a YouTube channel? Are you connecting with people in other ways, not just on Facebook, but seeing how Facebook can be better used for you on other channels? So it's a prime opportunity to begin engagement efforts beyond just the platform. It's also a great way to establish a default way to gather information. So don't miss the opportunity to handle the tough questions on here and make sure that you have the ability to encourage your community to be digital first. We all have little mini computers in our pockets now. That's our cell phones. And most people are going to be looking for ways to get information from their cell phone more so than from any other place, such as an iPad, or guess what? Nobody uses a desktop anymore, or a laptop, things like that. Stay relevant with your community here. What about Nextdoor? I can't encourage it enough. Your community, your way. This is where you are going to connect with the audience that matters most, you guys. This is your residents. These are the people who have to confirm that they live in your jurisdiction, and therefore your story and the way that you interact with your community is going to matter most on this platform. Anything can go viral from anywhere in the world on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. But at the end of the day, if your community is connecting with you and they're believing and invested in who you are because you are telling your story in the way that they want to consume it, you're going to create what Ken Blanchard calls raving fans. And how great is it to have a connected community that understands what you do, that's educated, that's informed, that's, again, turning around and telling your story on other platforms. So it's a very grassroots opportunity for you. How do you do that? So it's your story, your way, essentially. You talk about what you do day to day. You show them what that looks like. You have fun with relevant content like GIFs and memes. And then you also have the ability to have the most consumable content readily available to your residents, and that's video. Video is 8 times more likely to get any engagement whatsoever on social media than anything else. Photos, 2 times more likely. And guess what? If you're just posting text and links to things, you're not going to be engaged with because people scroll right past that. Remember, people are dramatic and lazy. They're not going to engage with things where they have to read a lot. So give them visual pops to grab onto. They have 8 seconds. You have 8 seconds to attract people's attention with a video. So make it fun, make it enticing, make it exciting, and use things that show that you understand how people prefer to communicate. So things, for example, would be like emojis, totally worth it. Quick hit options to tell your story or to give people relevant data and information is to use things that direct them to immediate action. So like a phone and then a telephone number like you see here in this last option on the Nextdoor story. But also using Nextdoor to figure out how your community wants to connect on other platforms is the best way to update and ensure that your strategy stays relevant and fresh. So pull your audience. This is your support network. They're going to tell you how to essentially talk about the issues that they care about and how you can better educate not just your immediate community, but those beyond who follow you on your channels. It gives you a great pulse on what's happening online and how essentially your outer networks are influencing your inner network, which is your community. Go behind the scenes and find ways to bring your community into a better understanding of all the policies, procedures, and practices that you employ. What could that look like, for example? How about a tabletop exercise? Or how about a Q&A with questions from a post on Nextdoor? We did that not too long ago with a podcast. We asked our community, what do you watch on TV or what do you see in movies that you think is a myth when it comes to law enforcement? What would you like to hear from us? How would you like us to correct that? And we actually used the questions and comments that we got on the post on Nextdoor to share on our podcast, which is shared across our social media channels. So again, our community influencing our larger reach and our larger understanding of how social media is used to tell our story and how it impacts our various platforms. But you have to understand at the end of the day that making communications decisions on just those 3 platforms alone, based on your comfort level, is the quickest way to become irrelevant. How are you living where your audiences are? How are you finding ways to engage with, for example, the next generation of potential public servants or potential people who are going to look at how communication strategies are employed to connect with audiences, especially in a digital space? Content that you use on Facebook, for example, is not necessarily going to translate well across all other platforms. So, for example, an Instagram quiz is not going to serve the same purpose on Twitter, and a snap-along is not going to be as successful on Facebook. So how are you using these individual platforms to reach individual audiences, but potentially having far wider impacts across your digital presence as a whole? Look at how these platforms are used specifically for specific purposes. So Facebook, for example, it's driving awareness and engagement with videos and live streams. We've already talked about that. Did you know that customer service is the #1 priority on Twitter? How are you ensuring that you are engaging with audiences for follow-up questions? Again, no comment or question left behind on Twitter. But Instagram is where it really starts to get interesting. 60% of users learn about a product or service on Instagram. Are you using Instagram to tell your audiences how they can perhaps file a police report, how they can get to City Hall to learn about the minutes from a city council meeting? For Snapchat, are you using your channel on there perhaps to leverage geo filters or lenses to create interactive content with, yeah, it's scary, but it's fun, your teenagers? What are you doing to enhance the way that you're connecting with people who are not going to use the, quote, traditional channels that we have become accustomed to and that we're just starting to feel like we're getting really good at, like Facebook, Twitter, and possibly Nextdoor? So this is where we start to talk about the next generation. How do we get comfortable with these ever-changing platforms that may not seem conducive necessarily to government work, but are great ways to highlight what your agency does because it is the most raw, the most inventive, and the most creative options available to you. So let's start with Instagram. If you are not doing Instagram stories yet, believe it or not, you're starting to fall behind. What we're starting to see is that people are no longer especially teenagers and young adults, they're no longer falling back on your profile pages to look at information with regards to what your agency is or what you do. They're looking to have you tell your story in an Instagram story. So how are you branding your agency this way? How are you using these instantaneous interactions to cultivate the next generational audience to better know, quote, who you are? So for us, for example, let me give you a couple of ways that you could do this. You could do it for back to school. Again, this is all the kids are starting to go back to school this week. Great way to do back to school safety, back to school kind campaigns with students understanding why social media is a place to encourage a positive environment. What about talking about polls or quizzes like the New York Police Department does? They do a quiz every Tuesday with the various aspects of their department. You'll never learn so much as you will with a quiz, for example. And how we're using things like swiping up, so calls to action, including links in your post to drive people to your website, for example, to have them see more, learn more. How are you including options like GIFs and music that make you relevant? All of these things are built within the app that you can include in posts to have some creative fun. And let me let you in on a little secret here. Your boss doesn't know about Instagram stories yet, so guess what? You can have a ton of fun right now on this platform and fail, try, succeed, whatever, before your boss ever really gets to find out what's going on. So give it a shot. So also, like I said, test their knowledge. Get them to learn about the services you provide and add one or more stories to show appreciation for participation. You want to give people a reason to come back. So a great profile to look at this that does this well, Disney. They do quizzes and they thank people for coming back, and then they add on to those stories. So they're giving people more information, more consumable content for them to want to come back after the fact, even if they didn't do well on the quiz. For landing pages, so your profile, that's where you want long-term content to live, things that really define your agency that will live on well past a story, which typically lives for about 24 hours before it disappears. So how are you showing people what the news isn't going to cover? How are you showing your next generation of teenagers, your next generation of public servants? What they assume of government isn't actually what happens in government. So give them reasons to believe in the work that you do, your mission statements, by showing them what it's like, what they don't see, that they don't see on the news, that they don't read online, that isn't covered necessarily in the day-to-day, but that you have complete and unfettered access to. So another way to think of it as stories versus photos, what withstands the test of time versus what works in the moment. But what about Snapchat? This is by far the most terrifying platform that a lot of government agencies look at because it's so nuanced and it's so different, and they've had so many iterations over the last 2 years that people have just been like, that's it, I give up, I'm done. But what you have to remember here is that in a world where there's so much negativity, people are looking for places to feel happy, have a positive environment, and have fun. So a poll that was recently conducted said that 95% of Snapchatters actually find that this app makes them feel the happiest, more so than any other that's out there. So if you can be in a place where this positivity exists, where you can stay close with people and have good, positive experiences, why not go for it? Why not try it out? Great way to share your day-to-day. And also, it's a great way to connect with people more so than ever in instantaneous moments. If you look at it, all of the colored apps here between Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, more people are looking at Snapchat when they're on the go, commuting, or traveling. So it's great for limited time periods and geo-targeting for reach, and especially good for things such as natural disasters. And what does that look like? You can actually set specific locations to include or exclude your targeting audiences and your parameters. You can also do this by typing in a selected country, state, or region, postal codes, addresses, latitude and longitude pairs, But what's so great is that you can target within 0.6 of a mile, and you can go up to 100 meters or kilometers or 62 miles for reach. So for natural disaster purposes, depending on how wide-ranging the incident is, that's huge because you can message specifically to those folks about critical things that they need to know and people who prefer to use this platform. Like, for example, did you know 1 in 3 people that use this platform are parents? 80% of people that use this platform are of voting age. So you've got a very young audience here who are looking to consume information. And you can also choose a location radius by selecting how many miles in the US, for example, or if you're elsewhere, kilometers, that you'd like to target around places of interest. So huge opportunity for you here to engage, connect with very specific audiences or people who come to visit, especially if you're in Parks and Rec, the travel industry, anything like that. Snapchat is going to be a great place for you to try these options out. Great profiles that I encourage you to look at, for example, in the way that they tell their story differently and have fun. The Interior Department. They're all over the country, and they allow people within their industry and their agency to take over the account. So they'll go and visit a national park and have fun things to tell about that national park, like Yosemite. NASA, out of this world, literally, way that they use Snapchat to tell their story, to allow people to get to know what goes on. You also get to have, again, creative opportunity here, like on Snapchat, that you really don't have anywhere else. You get to be original, but you have to understand that you also need to keep it simple. You don't want to include too much information in one post where people feel overwhelmed or that they can't consume it all quickly and they can't share it with others. You also want to ensure that you diversify your content. So change the color, change the size of your words, break out of the norms of your storytelling. This is where you really get to let your creativity flex itself a little bit. And this is also a great platform to experiment. For those of you who are in law enforcement on the call, we actually use Snapchat to help find missing children, a complete byproduct that we did not expect when we signed up for the platform. In fact, of the last 10 people that we've had, children who have been missing, about 2/3 of the time, they will reach out to us on the platform and they've told us where they are so that we've been able to close out the case quickly within a couple of hours because their friends and their peers are sharing their photo after we've shared it on Snapchat, looking for them to ensure that they're safe. And we've been able to close out that case and resolve it safely and peacefully because the kids will know that they can connect with us on there. We're actually having account takeovers next week, having a little bit of fun with our school resource officers so that kids in schools know that in the event of a critical incident at a school, like God forbid there's ever an active shooter, they know that they can reach out to us on there and that they can connect with us. And that's, in the interim, they can have a little bit of fun with us. All of these platforms have great archiving tools. Snapchat is the only one that doesn't, unfortunately, and that platform will not change that way. But a great way to bypass that issue is to just take screenshots of everything. Every other platform has the ability to connect with Archive Social, for example, for archiving. So in the event that you have some fun, you want to do something a little bit different, and you may get questions about it later, you can actually plug into Archive Social and download all of your content very easily so that you can look back and see what worked, what didn't, what your audiences may like to see more of, or perhaps what you can step away from and actually show your superiors, hey, this maybe isn't working, let's try something else. And here's my contact information for any of you that have any questions. Please feel free to reach out 24/7. I can't stress enough how important it is that we all stay connected in this industry together and you have a network essentially of people who you can run ideas by, who you can check things with. Feel free to reach out on Twitter. That's my direct line there, as well as my direct email, and I'm happy to help.
Katie, thank you so much. This question of which platforms to use, how to use them, comes up consistently in our conversations with agencies across the country. And your presentation today got right to the meat of the matter. A lot of actionable tips, a lot of great guidance here. So appreciate the walkthrough on those primary channels that continually come up in our conversations. And I'll say that many of your tips stuck with me, but one quote certainly from Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last. I recognize that I wasn't first in the presentation order here, so I know I'm last, but we'll try to give you some last words as well with the Q&A here in a little bit. So what we want to talk about now, as we give you a chance to catch your breath, here at Archive Social, we sit right at the center of the use of social media in government. But our bent is more on the legal policy side to really eliminate those challenges, help you avoid anything that can detriment your ability to use social media, and really empower that open dialogue with your citizens. And so we have this segment here for just a few minutes called Social Media CYA. Again, that is perhaps the most important thing to do in government is to CYA, and certainly something I know, Katie, you spend a lot of time on. And of course, it's covering your agency when I say CYA. And so I want to give you a bit of an update from what's happening in the space, some of the latest news and some case studies that we've run across in context of this conversation around using multiple platforms and channels for your social media. And so for our first example, it comes out of Hunt County in Texas, and in fact involves the Hunt County Sheriff's Office. Now, this is an ongoing case, a lawsuit filed in April of this year, and it deals with a topic that we are well familiar with. If you've caught any of our previous webinars in the agency to agency series, this is one that we talk about quite a bit. And so yet another example of a circumstance involving First Amendment speech and the belief that a citizen's First Amendment rights may be infringed on. In this circumstance, what happened is that the county on their Facebook page actually put in the about section of the page that they would not allow certain types of language, and that they would actually remove content and perhaps ban users based on that, on what's being posted. And an individual was posting on the Facebook page, had content removed, was banned, but felt like his viewpoint was being discriminated. And again, that is the really, really difficult part about this, is that yes, you can remove content. Yes, not everything goes. It is a limited public forum. But at the point in which you are perhaps removing content based on viewpoint or opinion, those are dangerous waters. And that's really where a lot of these cases come from and a lot of the news articles. And so again, happened here with Hunt County. And so, a set of takeaways, again, this is around content being removed. The county obviously must have felt they were removing content accordingly to policy and the way to do things. But in the courts, this is still running because thus far it has been decided that perhaps there was censorship occurring. And so again, you've got to be careful with this. You've got to be thinking about that First Amendment right. But in the context of this platform conversation, one thing to recognize, and if you go read this case, which is, if you look at this article and you read the case, you'll see that, again, this was information posted on the Facebook About section in the article, which is actually an article on a law blog, right, by a person in that space. This editor, this writer had some editorialization about this, some commentary about how it was perhaps hasty or irresponsible for the agency to come up with these rules, and then even at some point the agency made a Facebook post clarifying their policy. And so what we want to call out here is you have to get your policy right. It has to be consistent. And at the point in time in which you're maybe making a social media post on one platform about your policy, or just putting it in the about section, not only could your policy be off, but then you're putting it in one platform, and you are on other platforms. More likely than not, if you're involved in social media, you're on Twitter, perhaps you're on Instagram, perhaps you're on Vimeo. And so this notion of really specifying your rules, the policy on a single platform can get you in trouble. Again, you have to get the policy right, but a better practice is then to have that policy in one place that you link to from all of your platforms. You really want to avoid the circumstance of on a certain platform you're making policies that may not be consistent elsewhere. So lessons learned here. Now to switch gears, let's talk about a bit more of a success story. This is a case study we've shared in the past, but it's a really enlightening case study, particularly when it comes to usage of multiple platforms. Katie touched on the topic of archiving, of course, necessary for ensuring your record obligations to public records law. In the town of Erie, Colorado, in 2017, actually received a records request for 14 different keywords across their entire social media presence, across all their platforms, spanning 6 months. And the records request is on a certain topic. It was a topic related to oiling, drilling, fracking. So the point of using many platforms, communicating on a top-of-mind topic across all platforms, something that the town of Erie does really well, because their social media is important, because it's at the center of their communication strategy. The records request that you'd normally get on email and other documents, of course, touches their social media, but because they have the right policies in place, they have the archiving in place, easily able to respond to this records request, finding 14 different keywords across 6 months of social media across several platforms. So you can be in a good position if you approach this in the right way, right policy, being consistent, necessary technology in place. So that's our CYA for today. Now, here at Archive Social, again, We want to be a resource to the industry in many ways, of course, with presentations like today's from Katie. On the legal side of things, if you're wondering, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? What do you mean public records? What do you mean archiving? That's a conversation that we can take offline with you. So if you're not as familiar with the public records requirements in your state that apply to you, there's a lot of great guidance out there from your Secretary of State's office, from maybe your state archives. We're happy to catch you up on that, give you the latest and greatest of those legal requirements. If you're thinking about archiving and wondering who else uses Archive Social or how other agencies are approaching this topic, we work with a lot of cities and counties, more than 2,000 public agencies, a lot of law enforcement, school districts, and other types of agencies. Reach out to us. We're happy to provide references. And then when it comes to the records requests and real legal situations, there are the situations you read about in the news, but there are far more situations that happen that don't go in the news that we deal with, that we see. We're happy to share real records requests, real legal challenges from right around you, perhaps in the same county that you're in, perhaps with a neighboring town. So reach out to us. We're happy to share all of that. So again, we can take this conversation offline. And to help do that, I'm going to actually go ahead and launch a poll, an optional poll. If you'd like us to reach out to you on any one of these topics, we will give you a phone call. And that phone call is not about our product. It's really about you and the legal environment around you and us being a guide to help you. We're happy to talk through these issues. And of course, if there's a way that we can help you with archiving beyond that, we can take it from there. So go ahead and fill out this poll. We'll be happy to reach out to you. And with that, I'm going to switch over to questions. And Katie, to kick us off, you covered a lot of platforms today. I'm going to go through a set of questions that we had come in both prior to the webinar and on this webinar related to the platforms to uncover some more tips. And I want to take us back to Instagram. Katie, you mentioned that it's an ideal platform for giving the community insight into who you are as an agency. The question here is, what are some best practices for using Instagram to share the community's identity?
That's an excellent question, and I think the best way to do it would be to bring the community in as part of your audience when it comes to having the photos showcase what you do in the community. So perhaps a photo contest, for example, that connects your agency's employees with interactions that they're having with the public, just in your city, in your county. Also encouraging folks to share photos with you, perhaps if there's a particular location that you're highlighting, like a park, for example. And then also, whenever you have public events, make sure that your events or that your photos highlight what's going on there. Stage photos never work. You want to capture moments. You want Instagram to reveal what positive interactions were happening that people may have missed because they were passing by or they were so engrossed in what was going on that they didn't have the opportunity to take a photo, but yet you were there to capture.
I love that emphasis on authenticity, not staging the photo, crowdsourcing it, a lot of different ways to really show what the community is about. Good stuff there. Now, keeping on the track of networks like Instagram, we had a question come in regarding reaching youth. From your presentation, I assume that, again, Instagram, Snapchat being the primary channels to reach youth. A part B of the question was, how about young males 20 plus? Is there a distinction there?
Sure. Actually, youth will probably be, especially with high school and younger, you're going to see a return to Instagram. Males who are in their 20s, typically, they were part of that generation where Snapchat really took off. So if you're trying to connect with males in particular, I would see how you fare on Snapchat first. But for your school-age kids in particular, definitely start looking at Instagram with an emphasis on Instagram stories or even IGTV. Very
good. I'm going to take it to a different network now, one that I'd say is not one that's particularly exciting for the youth. It's LinkedIn. And we've had questions come in both prior to the webinar and here live about using LinkedIn for government. So what's your advice for using LinkedIn in general for government? And then a question also came in about using it for recruiting. Love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So LinkedIn, excellent point about recruiting. That is such a niche market that I would say you don't really have a huge opportunity to have a whole lot of fun there, but it is a great place to tell your story to a group of professionals or people who are looking to go into public service. So what are you doing to highlight the ways that you can that you connect with folks in those two categories only. You're not going to be connecting with youth. You're not going to be connecting with your older audiences. This is very much the workforce that you're talking to. So what you have to look for, and what we've seen a lot, especially in the Silicon Valley, is culture. What is your work culture, and how is that culture connecting with the wider communities that you serve? Not just your community as a whole, but almost the subsectors of that community. So, for example, your immigrant community, or your audiences that are connecting with your senior centers, things like that, or even your business community. So those are the things that you have to think about with using LinkedIn for government in terms of how you are essentially becoming a primary platform for recruitment and using your recruitment as a storytelling tool.
Great advice on LinkedIn. And the point about the audience, the level of engagement on LinkedIn, perhaps not being the same as you'd see on other platforms, does ring true when we look at it, but still an important platform. I wanted to take it a bit more broad on that same topic, though, because we had a great question come in from an HR director that's joining us. So thank you for joining us. Wow, we're talking about social media. Social media impacts the agency in a lot of roles in the agencies in a lot of different ways. So while we have a lot of communicators here, really welcome other folks in other roles in government joining us. And so thank you, Mandy, for joining us, HR director out of Wisconsin. And her question was more broad about, perhaps outside of LinkedIn as well, what are best approaches to use social media in general to attract potential employees?
You definitely want your message across your channels to show how much fun it is to be a part of your agency. Work culture in general, especially for the latest group of folks coming into the workforce, they care very much, not so much about the work itself, but what the results of those are and how that is impacting the wider audience. So when you show how much fun you're having, when you talk about just the incredible impact that your agency is having on the community, and you're really highlighting that, for example, through video, that is going to attract a lot of people who are looking for a place where they feel like they're coming home, like they're coming to a place where they see people that are like them, they feel that people are that they believe the same things that they believe in, that their missions are the same things that they are working for as potential employees. And that will vary in terms of how you frame that depending on what platform you're using. LinkedIn, it'll probably be a little bit more straightforward. Snapchat, for example, you can have a lot more fun, especially if you're looking at interns or young people coming in to work for your agency. Those who are more established, you're definitely going to have the platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn and even Twitter to really have a longer form storytelling opportunity than you would for the younger audiences.
Very good. And just a quick comment that came in through our question window. We do appreciate the commentary as well. We've got an attendee that says, I'm in my mid-20s. I found that people in my age group have actually given up on Snapchat in favor of Instagram, and that the younger generation still loves Snapchat. So good to have that perspective from the audience. I'm going to switch us over to some core questions that really speak to why we do what we do here at Archive Social alongside this agency-to-agency webinar series. And the questions are on the policy side of things. Do you, Katie, have a social media policy, and does your organization certainly in that policy have commentary regarding what employees may post?
Sort of. We obviously don't want to limit an employee's freedom of speech. That being said, our social media policy, which is available online if you'd like to view it, you go to nvpd.gov, go to general information, and then policies and practices. It does state that there are an employee could face certain ramifications if what they post is on social media may be controversial or does not fall in line with what our agency stands for. So we oftentimes, during in-house training, we will educate employees on privacy and ensuring that their channels, if they would prefer to remain private, are locked down. But everybody must understand that whatever you post on the internet will live on the internet forever, no matter what. So we don't allow employees, for example, to post on duty. I'm the sole exception for that because it's my job. But for example, patrol officers not allowed to post while they're on duty. And then we do say when you're off duty, you are not allowed to post about an incident that is happening in our jurisdiction. And we say that if you post something that perhaps causes some concern with some community residents and perhaps HR or the city manager becomes aware of it, you will have to step up and own what you say and, understand that there are consequences for certain things that you may put out.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the most important aspects of the policy is that ultimately you can't control every single decision a human being makes, but as long as the agency has a strong, clear policy, can help protect the agency, cover the agency as best as you can. And one more follow-on question to that we had come in was generally around risk. We've had several of our peers decide not to use social media to this degree due to the perceived risk and potential for lawsuits. What advice do you have for us there?
I would say you can't live in fear. That being said, I would say you want to ensure that the people in your agency know what it is that you're doing online. You want them to know what story you're telling. Our biggest fear would be to have an officer go out on patrol and have a community member approach them to talk about a press release or a story that we had shared on our social media channels, and that officer had no idea what they were talking about. That's another level of engagement, is ensuring that your internal audience is able to connect with your external audience. And so bridging that gap, essentially, we call it ABC. We answer, we bridge, and we communicate across all channels, both internally and externally. They mirror one another. And we want to ensure that our digital presence, our digital personalities, what people experience online, that's essentially the same thing that they would see and feel in person when they had a real world experience with one of our team members here. So I would not discourage people from using online social media sites or anything like that solely because you want them to stay informed. You want them to know what you're doing because you never know who needs to be a champion for your agency.
And to add on to that, you gave us some light on your internal policy. What do you have in your external policy? How do you approach that more from a mechanic standpoint?
You mean for what we post on social media?
Yes, and the expectation setting to the audience that you have. To what level do you set that expectation? What are some of your rules of the road for your audience?
I think you never want to encourage an opportunity for people to essentially devolve into name calling or anything like that. So the terms and the way that we write things when it comes to any topic are very deliberate, and we really think about the way that we portray it because we want to ensure that we create conversation, not that more so than we ever encourage anything that would pit somebody against one another. So when we set the expectations for the community, after we post something, we definitely stay online. We socially listen. The social listening is as important as engagement because you are able to follow up with people and you're able to reroute the conversation if things start to go awry. Inevitably, you can't prevent that 100% of the time, but you can definitely step in and let your wider audience know that's watching as things unfold that you're there listening and that you're willing to jump in and be a part of the conversation and redirect if necessary.
I absolutely love the philosophy there, and we've seen that bear out in practice with how you all approach the responsiveness and the engagement on social media there in Mountain View. Now, taking it back to managing the platforms, great question from one of our audience members on essentially the tug of war between meet your audience where they are, but don't post the same info on every platform. So how do you balance those two?
So it really depends on the platform that you're using. So for example, don't ever post a press release on Instagram. Nobody's going to read that. Instagram is a visual platform, same with Snapchat. And so even more so, as we're seeing as it changes, Twitter. So what you want to ensure is that the content is accessible across all channels, just the way that it is presented may be different. So Facebook, you can absolutely do long form. Like I said, it's typically trending towards an older audience on that platform, so they're going to take the time to read. What you want for Twitter is an accurate headline that depicts in its totality what people may read if they click on the link to get more information that you're sharing with that post, along with a visual that adds or enhances that particular information. Instagram, you're going to want to do a call to action in a story where you have quick hit information with a swipe up option so that people can go and read more there. Don't ever post a PDF or anything like that in a photo on your landing page. That's not a good representation of your agency. The same thing can be said for Snapchat with a call to action, people clicking the link to learn more. Nextdoor, it's really up to your audience what they prefer. Are they preferring a link to content, or in Mountain View, and again, this is totally individualistic to your agency or your community, they actually prefer to read the whole thing there. They like that landing page. They like that content all in one place. So that is really up to you to determine what your audience wants there.
A lot of awesome ground that we're covering here. We can keep you going all day, but I promise we'll wrap it up here in a question or two. One other question that came in, also dancing around both the legal side as well, the reality of what happens on your social media pages in terms of how citizens want to interact with you. The question is, how do you handle issues of HIPAA or privacy concerns on social media, whether in your own posts or in other people's comments?
HIPAA is a very big issue in terms of what, for example, your community or local journalists want to know in terms of extent of injuries or something like that versus what we as agencies can provide. We always stay very general. We say minor, moderate, or major injury, or fatal, unfortunately, if it goes that route. And then we give general areas of where those injuries occurred: upper body, torso, lower body. And those, we've been told from our local hospital affiliates that those don't violate any HIPAA rules. Beyond that, if we were to discuss any information specifically, if it was one of our own that was injured, we would have to get confirmation from them that we could share that information and sign off essentially saying that they are okay with that being shared publicly. We never ever share more than just the most basic or high level information because we understand obviously that people's rights to privacy trump everything else.
That's a great approach, being proactive about how to frame that kind of information. What about if that information does show up, that sensitive information, that private information? Has it shown up in people's comments to you? How have you handled that?
Yes, we've had people identify the individual that was injured. We've had people discuss extent of injury. Believe it or not, sometimes it comes up in court. It comes up in court documents, and the local media will share in graphic detail what happened to a particular individual. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it when it comes to local media, but when it comes to individuals on the platforms, we can message them privately, or we can, if it warrants it, because it's just so graphic and it's so specific on the individual, we can hide the comment. We try not to, just again because of First Amendment issues, but more often than not, especially if that happens on social media, people will either send well wishes or family members will actually ask them to take it down. And we've seen that happen several times.
Got it. Okay, well, we're coming up on the hour. I've got one last question for you. And the question is, let's say you started in social media when it was brand spanking new and had to convince everyone it was worthwhile. This is verbatim, folks. But now you've done all that convincing internally, you're on social media, and now you've been bypassed by trends, tools, and memes. What's the best way to catch up again? Now, I'll throw out a plug for the Archive Social Agency to Agency series, as you've witnessed today. But what else can you do, Katie, to catch up and get back to the trend?
I would say, again, speak to your audience. Talk to your audience about what they want to see. Your point and your goal always is to be relevant with your digital audiences and with your community. If you are able to utilize the tools and the trends to help facilitate that, by all means go for it. Does that mean you need to participate in every lip sync challenge that happens? Absolutely not, nor should you. But using things that your audience resonates with, like memes and GIFs, for example, and those are built-in tools on the platforms. Go for it, use them. They evoke so much without you having to say a whole lot. But if you're finding that you feel like you're falling behind or you're not sure what works and what doesn't for your agency, talk to your peers. Find out people who are in your similar position or similar circumstance and get to know either how you get out of that funk, what you can actually hone in on to master in terms of tools that you use or trends that you see, and then turn around and see how your audiences react to that. You always want to ensure at the end of the day that your relatability, your humanity is expressed in ways that speak to your audience and that accurately reflect who you are as an agency. You don't have to do everything all at once, but make sure that you are still having fun with what you're doing and that you still believe in what the mission of social media is doing for your agency. If you're starting to feel like that's not the case anymore, find folks to talk to about it and figure out possibly how you can reinvigorate that a little bit.
Wonderful. It is a two-way conversation after all. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us today for this two-way conversation with you, Katie. I did have a question come in, I think it was for me, about the presentation being available. Perhaps my favorite way this has ever been framed: will this presentation be archived? Well, folks, that's what we do here at Archive. We archive everything that we can. We absolutely have a copy of the presentation, and we would not have wanted to have missed out on capturing all of this advice, the philosophy, and the down-to-earth tips that you can employ. So much great content here. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us. Thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.